1 in 6 people will experience a toxic relationship with a narcissist in their lifetime, but no one prepares you for what happens after you leave. Not the silence, not the manipulation that continues even in your absence, and definitely not the deep, confusing pain of still caring about someone who broke you. It starts slow like a dream. They see you, understand you, until one day, everything shifts. You're no longer loved, you're managed, controlled, dismissed, and then comes the break. You pull away, thinking it's over. But with a narcissist, the breakup is never the end. It's just the start of their most dangerous game. Research shows that emotional abuse changes your brain chemistry the same way physical pain does. That's why you still think about them, still wonder, still feel. But here's what they fear the most and what you must understand if you want to be free. If you've ever been trapped in this kind of relationship, or you're still trying to escape its grip, hit that like button. And if you feel the need to speak, drop your story in the comments or simply write thank you if this video helps you put a name to what you've lived through. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But what happens when someone learns to weaponize that avoidance? Narcissists do it instinctively. And the terrifying part is, they don't need to scream, hit, or threaten. They hijack you silently from the inside. According to Dr. Ramani Devasula, clinical psychologist and narcissism expert, up to 1 in 20 people show strong narcissistic traits. That's not rare. And if you're watching this, it's likely you've been in close proximity to one. Maybe you're still entangled. Maybe you're trying to understand why your mind doesn't feel like it belongs to you anymore. This is not about bad luck in love. This is psychological warfare, and you've been on the front line without knowing it. Let's be clear. Narcissistic abuse isn't just emotional manipulation. It has neurological consequences. When exposed to gaslighting, being made to doubt your reality, your amygdala goes into overdrive. At the same time, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic and decision-making, is suppressed. You feel confused, frozen, and the worst part, you blame yourself for feeling that way. In one study by the University of Georgia, individuals who scored high on the narcissistic personality inventory were found to have lower gray matter volume in the left anterior region tied to empathy and emotional regulation, meaning they feel nothing when you cry, nothing when you break, but everything when you pull away. They don't connect with you, they control your perception of yourself. And yet, how do they get in? Through charm, through intensity, through something that feels like love. Freud called it idealization, the first phase of narcissistic attachment. You are put on a pedestal not because they admire you, but because they want to own your reflection. And once you're hooked, the shift begins. Slowly, strategically. You might remember moments when you caught them lying, twisting reality. But instead of confronting them, you second-guessed your memory. That's not your weakness, that's the result of a 2019 study in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence showed that repeated gaslighting can trigger complex PTSD responses similar to those found in soldiers. Think about that. Relationships with narcissists rewire your brain like a battlefield. Mark wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. But a narcissist doesn't want you to have that power. They dismantle your clarity. They isolate you, not always physically, but psychologically, by turning your feelings into flaws, your doubts into drama, your needs into burdens. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and every cut makes you question whether you deserve better. Why do smart, empathetic, even powerful people fall into these traps? Because narcissists exploit mirror neurons, the part of your brain that responds to other people's emotions. They mimic your pain, your joy, your language. You feel seen. But it's an illusion. Neuroscientist Dr. V. Ramachandran explains how mirror neurons can be hijacked, creating false emotional connections. What you thought was empathy was just a manipulation loop. And here's where it gets even darker. Once the narcissist feels you are fully captured, dependent on their approval, confused about your worth, scared to be alone, they begin the devaluation phase. They withdraw affection, mock your insecurities, accuse you of what they do. You start to crave their validation like a drug. And that's not a metaphor. MRI scans show that emotional abuse activates the same brain regions as physical pain. That's why you feel addicted. That's why it hurts, even when you know it's toxic. Stoic philosopher Epictetus warned, people are disturbed, not by things, but by the view they take of them. The narcissist knows this, and they shape your view until even your pain feels like your fault. You stop trusting yourself. You apologize for things you didn't do. You fear peace because they've trained you to expect chaos. But here's the truth. They don't want you to realize your mind is still yours. It's foggy, it's tired, but it's not broken. The moment you begin to name what's happening, trauma bonding, gaslighting, cognitive dissonance, you begin to take back territory. Language is power. Understanding is power. And even if your body is still next to them, your mind doesn't have to be under siege. This is not just heartbreak. This is a war for clarity. And the more you see, the less control they have. The moment you start seeing them not as a mystery but as a pattern, something shifts. You stop asking, why did they do this to me? And start asking, why did I allow it for so long? That question is painful, but it's the beginning of your freedom. And that's where we go next. Because once you pull away from their grip, they don't disappear. They retaliate. Part 2 will show you what happens when you leave and why their reaction is so violent, not physically, but emotionally. You need to be ready, because knowledge isn't just power. In this war, it's survival. The moment you pull away from a narcissist emotionally, physically, spiritually, something terrifying begins. Most people think the breakup is the end, but with a narcissist, it's the beginning of their most vicious game. You thought it was over. You thought silence would bring peace, but instead, the silence becomes a weapon they can't control, and that's when they panic. Clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani Devasula explains that narcissists see relationships not as emotional bonds, but as sources of narcissistic support. The second you cut that off, you've done more damage to their ego than any insult ever could. This isn't just rejection to them. This is annihilation. Narcissists aren't in love with you. They're addicted to the reflection of power they see in your eyes. Take that mirror away, and they crumble internally, but retaliate externally. Research published in Personality Disorders, Theory, Research, and Treatment shows that narcissists are highly reactive to ego threats, often responding with rage, manipulation, or even calculated attempts to sabotage. What does that look like in real life? At first, love bombing returns, a flood of apologies, gifts, dramatic promises to change. This is not real remorse. This is a tactic. Dr. Carol McBride, author of Will I Ever Be Free of You, describes it as the hoovering phase, like a vacuum pulling you back in, just to discard you again once control is restored. When that doesn't work, they flip the script. Suddenly, you're the monster. You abandoned them. You were the manipulator. They plant this narrative with friends, family, social media. They want to control the breakup story, because if they lose the image of being the victim or the hero, their fragile identity collapses. Freud described narcissistic injury as one of the most dangerous psychological reactions, because it bypasses rational thought and activates pure ego defense. You are no longer a person to them. You are a threat. And if you have kids, shared workspaces, or mutual parental alienation, smear campaigns, strategic lies, all of it fueled not by love but by the terror of losing control. Neuroscientifically, narcissists have increased activity in the default mode network, the brain system associated with self-referential thinking. They see every situation through one lens. Me. There is no empathy, no shared grief, just ego preservation at any cost. Now here's where most people get trapped again. You want closure, you want understanding, but a narcissist doesn't give closure, because closure means you leave with clarity, and they need you confused. They need you questioning your memory, your decisions, your worth. That confusion keeps the emotional tether alive. Dr. Judith Herman, a pioneer in trauma research, explains that psychological abuse survivors often return not out of love but out of cognitive dissonance, the mental pain of holding to conflicting realities. They hurt me and they once loved me. Narcissists exploit that dissonance with surgical precision. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury, but revenge isn't what they fear. Indifference is when you no longer react, when you no longer justify, when you move forward in silence." They feel something most people never associate with narcissists: terror, because now they no longer have access not to your body, but to your attention. You see, narcissists survive through energy theft. Emotional reactions are their fuel. Love or hate it doesn't matter. As long as they're in your mind, they have power. Neuroscientist Dr. Joe Dispenza describes this as energetic entanglement. Even thinking obsessively about them maintains a chemical bond in the brain, reinforcing the trauma loop. That's why you must become disciplined, not just with your actions, but with your thoughts. And here's the brutal truth you were never told. The narcissist expects you to come back. Statistically, most people return to a narcissistic relationship 7 times before finally cutting ties. Not because they're weak, but because the manipulation rewires the brain's pain-reward system. You crave what hurts, and that's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to heal. When you leave, they may cry, they may rage, they may disappear, but every one of those reactions is about them, not you. There is no authentic grief, there is no growth, there is only strategy, and once you see that, really see it, the spell begins to break. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You're not unlucky. You were targeted, and now you're awakening. In the next chapter, we'll dive into the most haunting question: if I know they're toxic, why do I still want them? The answer is not just emotional, it's chemical. Your healing begins when you understand that the war was never about love. It was about your identity, and that identity is now yours to reclaim. You know what they did: the lies, the manipulation, the cold silences, the moments that shattered your self-worth. And yet, you still feel something pulling you back. It's not love, not anymore, but it's something, and that something feels like a rope tied around your chest. You wonder, why do I still care? Why do I still check my phone? Why do I still dream about them? You hate it, but you can't switch it off. And that confusion, that's exactly what they wanted. Let's start with the science. Your brain doesn't distinguish between emotional abuse and physical pain. In a groundbreaking study published in the journal Science, researchers used scans to show that heartbreak activates the same brain regions as physical injury, specifically the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. When you break away from a narcissist, your brain goes into a state of withdrawal, as if you've just quit a drug. And in many ways, you have. Psychologist Dr. Patrick Carnase coined the term trauma bond to describe this invisible attachment. It forms when intense highs like affection, intimacy, connection are followed by sudden lows, criticism, rejection, punishment. This pattern triggers dopamine surges in your brain, followed by cortisol crashes. The unpredictability keeps you chasing the high, even as the lows become unbearable. This cycle is no accident. Narcissists instinctively understand that intermittent reinforcement creates the strongest attachments. It's not that you're addicted to them, you're addicted to the illusion of who they pretended to be. Epictetus once warned, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. But what if the thing you feel you've lost control of is your own longing? This is where identity comes in. Narcissists don't just hurt you, they redefine you. They shape how you see yourself. Maybe you once saw yourself as confident, expressive, independent, but after months, years of their micro-attacks and dismissals, you started dimming your light. You learned that being too much invited punishment, that having needs made you needy, and slowly, you adapted, you shrank. You twisted yourself into someone they could tolerate. And now, even after they're gone, you're not sure who you are without their gaze. Carl Jung called this loss of self in the other, and it's dangerous, because even after the abuse ends, the internalized voice of the narcissist remains. That inner critic that sounds eerily like them. That whisper that tells you you'll never find someone else. You weren't enough. You were too emotional, too difficult. This is the echo of psychological warfare, and it doesn't end with the breakup. But here's what they don't want you to realize. That echo, it's not your truth. It's a recording implanted over time, through repetition, guilt, and isolation. And you can overwrite it, not by silencing it but by confronting it. Neuroscience confirms the brain's capacity for neuroplasticity, its ability to rewire itself, even after deep trauma. You are not trapped in this loop, but you do have to choose to break it every day. The most dangerous part of post-narcissistic healing is nostalgia, not for who they were, but for who you were with them. The version of you that felt adored, protected, chosen, even if it was fake, even if it was fleeting. That version still lives inside you, and losing it feels like grief. But it wasn't them who gave you that feeling. It was your own capacity to love, to hope, to believe. and you still have that. You don't need their validation to awaken it again. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Your healing begins when you reclaim the power to choose your thoughts, to see the past not as a prison, but as proof that you survived what was meant to break you. So why do you still feel tied? Because your nervous system is still running old software. Because your heart was never the problem, your loyalty was used against you. Because your empathy became the very door through which they walked in. But all of that, it can become your strength. In the next part, we explore something the narcissist never wanted you to discover, their greatest fear. You'll see how your healing isn't just recovery, it's revenge by another name. Quiet, grounded, powerful, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that walks away without looking back. They act invincible, unshakable, cold, distant. You might think they don't care, not about you, not about what happened, not about the damage they caused. But beneath that mask of arrogance and indifference lies a truth they will never admit. Narcissists are terrified of being irrelevant. That is their greatest fear. Not abandonment, not betrayal. Irrelevance, being forgotten, being invisible, being reduced to a footnote in the life of someone they once controlled. Let's break it down. At the core of narcissistic personality disorder is an unstable sense of self, held together by constant external validation. Dr. Craig Malkin, a Harvard Medical School psychologist, explains that narcissists operate from a place of egoism, an identity that only exists when reflected by others. Take that reflection away, and they face the one thing they've spent their life avoiding, the emptiness of their own soul. Carl Jung described it perfectly. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That's why when you detach not just physically, but emotionally, they unravel. And here's where it gets interesting. They don't fear you being angry, they fear you being unmoved. Because as long as you rage, cry, post, explain, defend, they're still relevant, still the center of your thoughts. But when you become emotionally neutral, they experience what psychologists call a narcissistic collapse, a total breakdown of their fragile self-image. You've exposed the illusion, and they feel it like death. Studies published in Personality and Individual Differences show that narcissists experience higher than average physiological stress responses when they are ignored or excluded. It's not just ego bruising, it's panic. They've spent their lives building a persona meant to attract attention, admiration, and fear. The moment you see through that persona, when you stop playing the game, they lose oxygen. And now, here's how you use it. Not by seeking revenge, not by posting cryptic messages, but by living your life with dignity and silence. Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "He who does not react has won." Your silence is louder than any confrontation. Your peace is more violent to their ego than any insult. Because for the first time, you are no longer orbiting around their needs. You've stepped out of their gravitational pull. That, to them, is betrayal on a level they can't process. And yes, they will try to get back in. Through fake apologies, random texts, sudden compliments. They'll claim they've changed, but pay close attention. They're not checking on you, they're checking on their control. The difference is everything. This is why no contact isn't just a strategy, it's a philosophy of liberation. Neuroscience tells us that breaking the trauma bond takes time, but consistent absence of stimulation. No texts, no calls, no peeks at their social media allows your brain to begin building new patterns. You start to remember who you were before them. And more importantly, you begin to feel safe in your own nervous system again. Epictetus taught, we suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them. Once you stop judging their silence as punishment and start seeing it as proof of your strength, something changes. You stop waiting, you stop hoping, you stop fearing, because now you know the truth. They need your attention more than you ever needed their love. There's power in walking away. Yes, but there's more power in staying away without the need to explain, justify, or prove. Narcissists survive through chaos. When you become predictable in your peace, untouchable in your energy, they lose interest, but not before trying to provoke one last emotional reaction. Don't fall for it. The last trap is always the sweetest lie. You don't defeat a narcissist by destroying them. You defeat them by thriving without them, by becoming unshakable in your boundaries, calm in your silence, and unavailable to their games. That's the kind of strength they can't mimic and can never own. In part 5, we move forward. Now that you see the illusion, it's time to rebuild, to rise, not in reaction to the pain but from a place of inner clarity. You've seen the storm. Next, we learn how to become the mountain. This is the moment everything shifts. Not because they've changed, because you have. Because for the first time, you stop asking, why did they do this to me? And start asking, what will I become because of it? That question is the beginning of transformation. The ashes of your former self are still warm, but there is something rising steady, slow, and powerful. This is the rebirth. And it begins not with motivation, but with philosophy, with the quiet, ancient fire of the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and philosopher, faced war, betrayal, loss, and death on every side. And yet, he wrote in his journal not for others, but for himself. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. That's not just beautiful. That's neuroscience. Dr. Andrew Huberman of Stanford explains that cognitive reappraisal, the conscious act of reframing how we interpret events, can literally alter our brain chemistry. Your thoughts change your brain, not metaphorically, literally. So let's start with the truth. You weren't weak for falling into that relationship. You were powerful. You loved deeply. You trusted. You gave. Those are strengths. The problem wasn't your heart, it was where you placed it. And now, that same heart, wounded as it is, will become the furnace that fuels your rebirth. But how? How do you rebuild after someone has dismantled your sense of self? You begin by doing what the narcissist never could do: face your own soul. You look at the ruins without flinching, the lies you believed, the parts of you that stayed quiet, the boundaries you abandoned, not to blame yourself but to reclaim authority. In Stoicism, this is called ownership of the self. You are not responsible for what was done to you, but you are fully responsible for who you become next. The pain you're carrying, it's not just emotion, it's chemical. Emotional trauma reduces levels of dopamine and serotonin while increasing cortisol, keeping you in a state of high alert. That's why you feel tired, foggy, emotionally unstable. This isn't you. This is your body reacting to perceived danger. You are not broken. You are and every act of self-care, every walk, every deep breath, every time you say no when you used to say yes, sends a message to your nervous system. We're safe now. But Stoicism goes deeper. It teaches that safety doesn't come from comfort. It comes from resilience. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." This isn't about suppressing your emotions, it's about mastering them, not letting them control your decisions, your identity, your energy. That doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop reacting from the wound. You learn to observe your pain without becoming it. And here's the most radical truth of all. You don't need to get over the past. You need to build over it, not to erase it, but to prove that it never owned you. Carl Jung called this the integration of the shadow, the process of facing your darkness and using it as fuel for growth. Every scar becomes part of your architecture. Every mistake, a teacher. Every betrayal, a compass. You begin rebuilding by changing what you allow into your world, the conversations you tolerate, the energy you respond to, the standards you hold. You stop settling for attention and start demanding alignment, because once you've danced with manipulation, authenticity becomes sacred. You crave depth, truth, presence, and you stop explaining that to people who only understand power. This is how the fire of Stoicism works. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't chase. It burns quietly within, and over time, it reshapes you into someone no longer defined by their pain, into someone who no longer fears silence, into someone who knows deeply, I am enough, even when no one is watching. So let them talk, let them gossip, let them wonder why you're so calm. They don't need to understand your healing. It wasn't meant for them, it was meant for you. And now, in the final part, we confront what always comes next: the return. Because narcissists don't let go easily. They come back, always. And when they do, you'll be ready not to fight, not to argue, but to remain untouched. That's real power. And that's where we go next. They always come back. That's the rule no one tells you, but once you've lived it, you know it deep in your bones. Days, weeks, sometimes months later, a message, a glance, a memory they leave just close enough for you to notice. And at first, your body betrays you. The heart skips. the stomach turns. You feel something rising, fear, curiosity, anger. You think, what if they've changed? What if they finally understand? But you already know the answer. They didn't come back for closure. They came back for control. Narcissists are they feed on cycles: love, discard, silence, return. Dr. Ramani Devasula calls this the narcissistic loop, and it is as predictable as gravity. When they come back, it's never random. It's calculated. A response to something they saw. Maybe you posted a picture. Maybe someone mentioned you. Maybe they just felt you slipping too far out of orbit. Narcissists can smell disconnection, and they panic not because they miss you, but because they miss access to you. Carl Jung once warned that the greatest danger lies not in the shadow, but in the belief that we've conquered it too soon. The narcissist knows how to get back in. They've studied your vulnerabilities. They know your empathy, your longing, your need for meaning. So when they return, they don't return with fire. They return with softness, with all the right words. I've been doing a lot of thinking. You didn't deserve how I treated you. I've changed. But what's really changed? Their script, their timing. The only thing that's changed is you've grown. And now you see the pattern. Now you hear the lie under the apology. Because here's the truth, backed by decades of psychological data. Narcissists rarely change. True transformation requires introspection, accountability, and humility, 3 things the narcissist's fragile ego cannot tolerate. So what do you do when they come back? You stay grounded. You stay still. You remember what it cost you to crawl out of the fog. You remember the nights you cried without understanding why. You remember the way they made you doubt your sanity, your worth, your truth. And most of all, you remember that silence wasn't just absence. It was healing. Epictetus once said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. The final test isn't what they do, it's what you choose not to do. You don't reply to that message. You don't meet for that one last coffee. You don't offer them the soft landing they've never given you. Not out of hatred, out of self-respect. The highest kind of closure is realizing you don't need any. Neuroscience supports this. The act of re-exposure to trauma triggers can reignite dormant pathways in the brain. Just one conversation, one emotional response, can reawaken the attachment system, and you find yourself back in the loop you swore you'd escaped. That's why this moment is sacred. It's not about strength, it's about clarity. And if you're forced to speak to them because of children, business, legal matters, you do so. Like a stoic.com/measured, no emotion to feed from. You don't explain your choices. You become your choices. Your boundaries are no longer negotiable. They are facts. They are walls. The narcissist cannot scale because they were built, not with anger, but with understanding. Seneca wrote, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The narcissist's return can stir your imagination memories, hopes, but your reality now is different. You've seen what they are. You've learned what you are. And there is no going back, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself more. This is the moment they realize they've lost their grip. That no matter how sweet their tone, how perfect their timing, how polished their performance, they are no longer relevant. And that realization doesn't just wound them, it breaks them. Not because they loved you, but because they couldn't break you. You are not who you were when this started. You are not confused. You are not waiting. You are no longer a mirror reflecting their illusion. You are now a flame, steady, untouchable, and if they come too close, they'll burn. Let this be the final chapter, not of your pain, but of your liberation. You didn't just survive a narcissist, you transcended one. You faced the storm and came out silent, wiser, and sharper than ever. That is a kind of power they will never understand and never destroy. And now, you begin again, but this time, without them.